In this session, we will discuss trades levels and compensation tables. Inside payroll, you'll notice there's a setup field for trades and compensation tables. Let's go into trades first. Now, when you go into trades, you may have some default trades that get loaded automatically. Feel free to delete them and tweak and edit them as needed. A lot of times I recommend just deleting them and starting fresh. One of the things to consider with trades and levels is every employee requires one. So even an office staff is going to require a trade and a level. So what you should keep in mind is keep it simple as much as possible. For example, for your office staff or your admin staff, there's most likely going to be very little that you're going to need to do for trades and levels. So keep it simple. You don't need to set up a trade called office and list out all the different positions within the office because we're going to do that over in the initial employee setup with employee positions and titles and all of that. Here I like to call it a necessary evil for the office or admin staff. I would recommend keeping it simple here and use something like office. So in this case, you can click create new and you can just create a trade. And then down below, you'll need at least one level for every trade. So for the office staff, that's probably all that's needed, whether you want to call it admin, accounting, whatever you want to call it, but I wouldn't get too layered here. You can choose to, if you want, default workers' comp code classifications by trade and level. So for the office staff, is that if everyone's coded to the same workers' comp code, you could come down to here and add a tax classification and pick and say for this tax category, workers' comp, everybody who's in a trade of office is going to get 8810, for example. And that's one way to pre-fill workers' comp. You can also pre-fill it directly in the employee file, so a lot of times this isn't necessary here. But basically establish your trade and level and click Save. And we'll need to set those up ahead of time before we get to the employee setups and the next steps, because the employees, when we get to that part are going to need a trade and a level filled in. So where you can get a little bit more complex is in the field or, operations side of things, especially if you have a need for certified projects and or union coding. So if you need certified reporting and unions, more than likely you're going to set up a trade for that particular union or classification. So for example, I have one called cement masons, electrical, mechanical, whatever your area pertains to. And we're going to dig into it a little bit deeper in the next session if you want to watch it on certified and union setup. But the idea here is for cement masons, that's going to be my trade name. And then what classifications do I potentially have underneath cement masons? And you're going to want to list everything, every potential, not just the ones that you have now, but hey, there's a chance we might have apprentice year 2. Let's set up the ID here. So with the trades and levels, you can have the classification, the description show up on the certified report based on the overall work classification or on the individual levels. Typically, people are going to set it up based on the level. So just make sure the descriptions that you're using for the levels are what you want to show on the certified report. So you can see here you have different level IDs. They have to be filled out. You just hit the plus button at the end to add another line as you go. And basically you fill out your description. If you're reporting on the certified report, some of the certified reports display what's called a class level. And basically the only coding you should use on this is either a J for journeyman or A for apprentice and T for trainee. Okay, so for example, a foreman and a general foreman are still considered journeymen, so you would just use the code J. You can click on the help here to get more information on trades and levels. So if I click the help and I just type in trades and levels, you'll see a whole explanation as to some examples on what you can do here. But if you scroll down far enough, right here is what I'm talking about. In the class level, there is the description of what's going to show up: journey person, apprentice, trainee, or that group. Okay, so that's what this is for. And then the class percent will show up as well. If I go over to, I think mechanical, I have one, you'll see here apprentice 1 is 40%, 50%. You can list those in here. We'll talk in more detail in the certified setup, but the trades and the levels can dictate how it shows up on the certified report, and also how rates can be applied and benefit packages can be applied. So if you're paying employees different rates of pay based on classes, you can set up those classes here, and then later on in the compensation tables, you'll be able to build out that. But the most important thing is get these lists set up ahead of time. You're not going to be able to set up employees or set up your certified tables until you have all of these trades and levels set up. Next, we're going to start on and touch on compensation tables. We're going to dig into those in more depth in the certified and union configuration setup, specifically for certified and union tables. But basically, just to give you a high-end introduction to the compensation tables, they can be used for various things. The most common use, like I said, is for union or for certified jobs. And if there's a prevailing wage or a union table that you need to set up. What you're doing here is listing an ID based on the table. And this is all, flexible here. So you can set up and use your naming conventions any way you want. I would recommend keeping them consistent so you can easily sort out different locals and things like that. But tables can also be used for other things that maybe additional stuff you want to add on the project. For example, maybe you have a travel pay that you pay employees on certain jobs if they're traveling farther. So you can set up a table for travel, and you can apply that table to the job, and it'll give those employees who work on it something extra. Another thing that companies use compensation tables for is they might want to add an additional burden on to certain jobs, but they only want it on certain jobs. So you can set up a table that has a fringe listed on that table, and then you can apply it to just a certain job. So the concept here is going to be, and I'll just use a prevailing one for an example, is when you set up your table, you're going to come into here and you're going to add your trades. So the tables always need to be based on a trade. So based on the trades that you set up. In this example, well, I picked 2 that we got rid of already, but let's say we have a laborer trade here. And you can see here, you're going to be able to apply one of your fringes that you set up in the pay modifiers right to this table. And this says whenever it's a laborer, we're going to give them a cash fringe, and that cash fringe is $9.50 per hour. Okay. And you can also establish rates of pay. So for example, if they're a laborer and they're landscape, we're going to give them an REG of $39 an hour. So all of that's going to be set up in these compensation tables. It's an optional feature, but it is there. And what's going to happen eventually, and you'll see this in future videos, is at the very end when we're configuring our projects, the projects area is where you're going to tell the system which table to use for this project. So you can see right here, these 2 projects have a table linked to them. These ones don't. But I can come into here and say, all right, for Quick Bowl, when I set up the project, I can select the tables to use. So maybe I'm doing a burden, like I mentioned, so you can pick a burden table here. Or maybe I want to use a special table just for the rates of pays. You can pick which table to use here. All going to be determined by the job. That's where it's going to end up. So go ahead and get your trades and levels set up. And then, like I said, we'll discuss it further in the live classes and the Q&As as you go from there. Thank you.